A ring of artificial light shimmered across the polished glass table. The studio was pristine, a curated illusion of civility and balance. CNN's primetime debate show Union Table was live, broadcasting coast to coast. For political, figures sat evenly spaced like chess pieces across a sleek round table. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Senator Josh Hawley, and political analyst Angela Rye. The moderator, a silver-haired man with a permanently tight smile, turned to the camera with perfect posture. Tonight we ask the question tearing through American discourse: who gets to call themselves a patriot in 2025? The question hung like static in the air. And then the match was struck. Ron DeSantis leaned forward, hands folded neatly, face carefully neutral. But his voice cut sharp. "You say you love this country, Congresswoman," he began, not looking directly at her, but slightly past her, as if already addressing the future headlines. "But everything you advocate for critical race theory, in schools, open border leniency, defunding the police signals the opposite." The moment was surgical, chilling, planned. A fractional beat of silence followed, heavy and brittle. Even the host looked like he regretted letting the question land unchecked. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her spine was straight, her expression unreadable. Beneath the table, her hands tightened slightly, not in fear, but in calculation. A whisper from the control room. "Clip it. We just got the viral." Then her voice came, calm, precise, and sharp enough to draw blood. "Don't you dare confuse obedience with patriotism," she said, her gaze locking with DeSantis like steel. "I love this country enough to challenge it when it fails. The very people it promised to protect." A breath was drawn somewhere off camera. Angela Rye leaned back slowly, her expression caught between admiration and awe. "You're suggesting that my criticism makes me disloyal?" Crockett continued, her voice rising slightly, not in anger, but in force. "But history will show that the greatest patriots were the ones who said no to injustice, not the ones who cheered for it." DeSantis tilted his head, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's not injustice to want to keep American values intact." Crockett didn't let him finish. "Whose values? Whose America?" She leaned forward now, voice like cracked thunder. "The one that tried to erase my ancestors from textbooks. The one that still lets black voters wait 8 hours in line while y'all cut polling places in half." Hawley shifted in his seat. The moderator blinked rapidly, checking for a commercial break cue that wasn't coming. Rye glanced toward Crockett. Like something tectonic was shifting. The air was different now, electrified, reckoning level tension. "Love of country," she said, "is not about silence. It's about accountability. I criticize because I believe, and because I still have hope." On Twitter, the segment hit 700,000 views in less than 10 minutes. Someone clipped it mid-broadcast. Someone else overlaid it with James Baldwin's quote. TikTok spawned by the second. The phrases obedience versus patriotism and whose America trended before the segment ended. In the studio, no one spoke for a moment. Even the cameraman lowered his eye from the lens just for a beat. The weight of the exchange didn't need commentary. The moderator finally cleared his throat. "Too late. We'll be right back." As the commercial cue faded in, Crockett exhaled slowly. Once. Then she turned away from the table and whispered something to her aide. "Make sure they don't spin it. I'm not done yet." Outside, the internet was already ablaze. But this wasn't the climax. This was just the spark. The studio lights dimmed for commercial, but the war had already left the room. In the control booth, a young producer tapped her earpiece and whispered, "We just crossed 1.2 million views. It's not even over." Someone next to her muttered, "This is going to be bigger than we thought." Meanwhile, in the green room, campaign staffers paced like generals in a trench. Jasmine's communications director, a calm man with a relentless mind, stared at his tablet, watching Crockett's quote flood every social feed in real time. He didn't smile. He nodded once. "We're going to go full scorched earth. Time to load the receipts. Across the country, on Fox, on X, formerly Twitter, on Talk Radio, the narrative machine was already grinding. Sound bites were cherry-picked and weaponized. She hates America. She supports looters over law enforcement, wants to dismantle the very system that gave her power. But the accusation wasn't spontaneous. It was deliberate. Planned. Ron DeSantis had been here before. He understood the power of framing. In 2022, he launched the Stop Woke Act. In 2023, he blocked advanced placement African American studies in Florida schools. In 2024, he campaigned against day offices and state universities, calling them Marxist cancer. This wasn't new. It was the old script just repackaged for prime time. The idea was simple. Redefine patriotism as silence, obedience, and uncritical support for state power. And then cast anyone outside that frame as dangerous. On screen, the segment returned. From break, DeSantis straightened his jacket and smiled thinly. "Let's be honest," he said to the camera. "Some people build careers tearing down the institutions that make this country strong. If that's patriotism now, then we've lost our compass." Crockett didn't interrupt. She didn't even move. She let him hang himself with every syllable. The moderator shifted awkwardly. "Congresswoman, would you like to respond?" She turned slowly. "Let's talk about who gets to be called a patriot," she said, voice low but unyielding. "Because when you kneel to protest police violence, you're labeled a traitor. But when white men storm the Capitol waving Confederate flags, you'll call them confused patriots?" Holly's brow furrowed. "That's not fair, no," she snapped, sharp but surgical. "What's not fair is how patriotism's been hijacked by politicians who treat it like a private membership card. One, you revoke the moment someone speaks truth to power." The audience, mostly silent until now, murmured. Then Crockett leaned in, just slightly, locking eyes with DeSantis. "You say I hate America. But I've defended voting rights in courtrooms you've never stepped foot in. I've fought for veterans sleeping under freeways while you gave tax breaks to defense contractors. I've helped bury teenagers gunned down in their own schools, while you banned books about their history." DeSantis opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "Not fast enough. I don't perform patriotism," she said. "I practice it with my vote, with my voice, with my risk." Silence. Again. And then applause. Quiet at first, then rising, not thunderous, not staged but real, startling. Someone in the back row even stood. The host glanced toward his producer, panicked. We'll move on to the next topic in a moment," he said, his voice shaky, but no one moved on. Backstage, Crockett's aide whispered, "That wasn't a rebuttal, that was a demolition." Hercom's director uploaded a graphic within minutes. What patriotism actually looks like: a list of every civil rights case, community reform bill, and constitutional amendment Crockett had sponsored by midnight. The clip had 5.7 million views. By sunrise, conservative blogs were scrambling to discredit her using her race, her district, her tone. But something had shifted. She hadn't just defended herself. She'd redefined the battlefield. The morning after, the headlines played innocent. DeSantis spars with Crockett over definition of patriotism. Passionate exchange rocks primetime panel. Fireworks on live TV, who crossed the line. But anyone who had lived a certain kind of life, anyone with skin the color of caution, knew what had really happened. It wasn't just a political jab, it was a code. A dog whistle so sharp it could shatter glass for those forced to hear it. Jasmine Crockett read the headlines without blinking. Her phone buzzed nonstop from supporters, reporters, trolls. Her comms team was triaging them like a war room. Threats forwarded to the FBI. Praise pushed to donors. Neutral journalists offered curated facts. But inside her D.C. apartment, she sat quietly at her kitchen table, listening to a voicemail from her mother in Dallas. "You did right, baby," the voice said, cracked with age and pride. "But be careful. You know how they talk when they really mean something else." She did know, because unpatriotic had never just meant policy disagreement. Not when it was hurled at people like her in the 1960s. They called MLK dangerous for speaking against the Vietnam War. In the 80s, Angela Davis was blacklisted for teaching black history in public universities. In 2016, Colin Kaepernick was told to leave the country for taking a knee. It was always the same song. Change the rhythm, switch the instruments, but the melody was unchanged. Be quiet, be grateful, be invisible. And now DeSantis had sung it again, with a suit, a flag pin, and a rehearsed smile. That afternoon, on MSNBC, a guest tried to play diplomat. I think the governor meant patriotism in a general sense, not personal. But Rye, who had been on the panel the night before, didn't. Let it slide. No, let's be honest, she said, voice cold as glass. When they say someone like Jasmine Crockett doesn't love America, what they mean is she doesn't submit. She doesn't smile while being silenced. That's the crime in their eyes. The clip went viral. Again, and then the backlash followed. Right-wing influencers clipped Jasmine's comments mid-sentence. They overlaid them with American flags burning in slow motion. The caption screamed, "She hates America. Black radicals on the Hill. Critical race socialism. Strikes again." And DeSantis, he stayed silent. But his PAC quietly bought ad space to promote a new message. Real patriots, not performers. The implication was clear. Back in the Capitol, Crockett walked through the rotunda like a storm in silk. Reporters followed her, cameras trailing, but she said little. Until one question broke through the noise. "Congresswoman, are you accusing Governor DeSantis of racism?" She stopped walking. Her heels clicked once against the marble. Then she turned not toward the reporter, but toward the cameras. "I'm not interested in accusing anyone of anything," she said calmly. "But if the shoe fits, maybe ask why it was even lying around." There it was again. Not rage, not victimhood, precision. She turned back and kept walking. Her aide leaned in beside her. "That'll be clipped in 5 minutes. "It should be," she said. "People need to hear the echo. Classrooms and dorm rooms and barbershops and breakfast tables." The conversation was shifting. People weren't debating the words anymore. They were decoding the intent, because they recognized the formula. Call someone angry, then ungrateful, then undash American, then erase them. But this time, the erasure didn't stick. Crockett had turned the lens around, and now the nation was forced to ask not if she loved America, but whether America could love someone who told it the truth. The third segment of the live debate was supposed to focus on infrastructure reform, but no one cared, not anymore. In the control room, the host's producer was panicking. The broadcast wasn't following the planned structure. Social media analytics had hijacked the show's direction. On screen, the moderator glanced at his notes, then tossed them aside with a sigh so small it barely registered. "Congresswoman Crockett," said almost cautiously, "I want to give you the floor to respond fully." Jasmine didn't wait. "I don't need the floor," she said, voice even. "I need a country that listens." She shifted in her seat, not for comfort, but to face the camera dead on. Eda! The air in the studio turned brittle. The lights didn't flicker, but somehow everything felt sharper, as if the broadcast itself had become self-aware. "My grandfather fought in World War II, came home in a uniform, still couldn't vote without a literacy test." Pause. The silence wasn't empty. It was layered. "My father served in Vietnam. Came back to redlining, underfunded schools, and a job market that locked him out." Her voice didn't rise. It sank lower, deeper, steadier. Each word was a gavel, and I serve today in this house, under a constitution that counted people like me as 3/5 of a human being, in a media landscape that still questions whether I deserve to speak. She glanced to her right just briefly at DeSantis, didn't look back. "This country has tried to break every generation of my family," she continued, "and still we serve. We vote, we build. We don't burn." Camera didn't cut away, not even for reaction shots. The producers knew better now. Patriotism isn't silence. It isn't submission. And it damn sure isn't pretending that everything's okay when it isn't. She leaned forward, her voice now softer, but more dangerous for it. Patriotism is loving a country that doesn't always love you back, and choosing to fight for it anyway. A hush rolled through the studio. Doss crossed his arms, posture tight, lips pursed. Someone on a staff backstage muttered, "This is bad. She's controlling the narrative." Back at the panel, Josh Hawley tried to recover. "Well, Congresswoman, if you're so disillusioned, why do you keep participating in the system?" She didn't miss a beat. "Because my ancestors didn't survive plantations and poll taxes, so I could walk away when it got hard. I participate to finish the work they started." Angela Rye looked down for a moment. When she looked up again, there were tears threatening to surface. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The clip hit the internet like a meteor on TikTok. Teenagers stitched her speech over slow-motion edits of civil rights marches, classroom walkouts, and protest footage from the summer of 2020. On YouTube, commentators reacted live, faces frozen in stunned awe. One black vet uploaded a video simply titled, "That's what patriotism looks like." Oh. Within 3 hours, the quote was everywhere. "I don't need the floor. I need a country that listens." Printed on hoodies. Pinned on Twitter bios. Used in campaign ads, none of them hers. Meanwhile, DeSantis retreated. His next statement came not on air, but via email. "I respect all elected officials and the right to disagree. My goal is to have a principled discussion about America's future." It was bloodless, sterile, unsaid, and telling because Crockett hadn't just won the exchange, she had redefined it. This wasn't about patriotism anymore. It was about ownership, about voice, about narrative. And Jasmine hadn't borrowed the mic, she'd taken it. And when she was done, she didn't drop it. She passed it back to the people who needed to speak next. The sun rose slow and sharp over Capitol Hill the next morning. But the internet hadn't slept. By dawn, Jasmine Crockett was the most searched name in American politics. The video clip of her dismantling DeSantis had cleared 23 million views. But views weren't enough. The headline still carried the subtle poison. "Fiery Congresswoman defends unpopular policies. Radical or just passionate?" DeSantis faces off against controversial progressive. Crockett's team knew what came next. First came the misquotes, then the character attacks. And finally, the erasure, the quiet, systematic stripping of credibility by 1,000 passive phrases. But this time, she was ready. They opened the folder, the one labeled simply Receipts. It began with a press release, not flashy, just factual, bullet-pointed. Jasmine Crockett. By the numbers, 14 civil rights cases tried as a defense. Attorney in Texas, so over 400 hours of pro bono legal work for disenfranchised voters. Lead sponsor on 2 bills addressing police accountability and bail reform floor speeches. Cited in 12 legal journals for clarity and constitutional alignment. Cacanized by the Congressional Black Caucus for her work. On election protection, no adjectives. No narrative spin, just proof. The press release dropped at 9 o'clock at M.dot by 9:06. Journalists were quoting it by 10:12. Conservative pundits were already trying to reframe it, but the facts had weight. Weight that couldn't be distorted so easily. On air, a clip resurfaced from 3 years prior. A grainy video from a courtroom in Dallas. Younger Jasmine, standing at a wooden bench, hands steady, voice controlled. "No, Your Honor, we're not asking for sympathy. We're asking for the law to do what it claims to do, protect everyone, not just those who can afford it." The judge had ruled in her favor that day. Her client, a wrongly accused teenager facing 10 years for petty theft, walked free. That boy was now in community college. He posted the clip on Instagram with a caption, "She saved my life. Y'all better listen when she speaks." At a campaign stop in Houston, a woman pressed through the crowd with her teenage daughter just to whisper, "Thank you for not folding." Jasmine smiled, nodded, said nothing. She'd learned a long time ago that real credibility didn't shout it. Showed up, it kept records, and it never forgot who it was fighting for. By midday, her team released the second wave, a short cinematic video, 90 seconds long, cut like a trailer, not a campaign ad. It opened with grainy footage of civil rights marches, overlaid with her voice. "My love for this country isn't based on what it's given me, but on what it owes to the people who've built it. It ended with the line that had broken the internet. I don't need the floor. I need a country that listens. Even her critics had to pause. Some rebranded her as tactical. Others called her media savvy. But all of them began using her full title, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Not firebrand, not activist. Not radical congresswoman. It was a subtle shift, but a seismic one. She hadn't just gone viral. She'd built an evidentiary case for her patriotism. It's like any good attorney. And now, the question wasn't whether she belonged in the conversation. It was whether the country could keep up with her. Argument the country was listening now, but not all with open ears. Beneath every post that praised her, every video edit, every Baldwin quote, came a familiar undercurrent. It wasn't shouted, but it hissed, coiled beneath the surface like a wire just waiting to snap. Why is she always so angry? If she hates America so much, why doesn't she leave? She's lucky she even has a seat at the table. Was the same song, different arrangement. The double standard wasn't new. It was historical. When a white man like Ron DeSantis raised his voice, it was strong leadership. When Josh Hawley stormed out of a hearing, it was passion. When Tom Cotton blasted dissenters on the Senate floor, it was defending the Republic. But when Jasmine Crockett spoke calmly, methodically, with receipts, it was hostile, defensive, combative. Angela Rye addressed it head-on during a morning interview on CNN. I've sat on panels with screaming men for years, she said, brows furrowed, voice firm. No one ever asked them why they weren't smiling. But Jasmine, she breathes with conviction, and suddenly she's dangerous. But that's not a debate. That's conditioning. At Howard University, a professor held a lecture the next day, titled The Politics of Tone, Gender, Race, and Power in the Public Sphere. He opened with Crockett's clip and asked his students, who does America give permission to be angry? Who does it silence with civility? In a downtown cafe in Atlanta, a group of black veterans watched the clip silently. An older man with silver stubble and a military cap faded from the sun shook his head slowly. She's more of a patriot than half of Congress. But they'll never say it out loud. Not with her skin, not with her gender, not with that truth in her mouth. Meanwhile, pundits twisted themselves into knots trying to explain what made her so polarizing. They couldn't find the words, because the real reason sat just outside what they were allowed to say. It wasn't her voice. It was that she dared to use it, in a system built to marginalize. She demanded centrality, not permission, not politeness. Presence, eh? Political podcast titled Civics and Smoke broke it down in plain language. She's not threatening because of what she says, the host explained. She's threatening because she won't shrink to make others comfortable, and that's a problem. For a country that still measures patriotism by whiteness and compliance, the clip went viral again. A meme followed, where Crockett's image superimposed over the Constitution, the caption reading, apparently, my love for America has to come with a smile, a whisper, and a thank you note. She reposted it, quote tweeting, nah, one word, one refusal, and it said more than any statement ever could. That week, the debate shifted from policy to positionality, from legislation to legitimacy. Who gets to correct America without being exiled from its identity? Who gets to raise their voice and still be called loyal? The answers weren't pretty, but they were necessary. And Jasmine Crockett, with every calm breath and unshaken stare, made the country ask a question it didn't want to answer. Not just who gets to be a patriot, but why we keep asking that question in the first place. The storm didn't start with Jasmine. It started with the silence that followed her. She didn't gloat, didn't post a clip, didn't even do a victory lap on MSNBC that evening. But the panel did, and the silence left a vacuum loud enough to collapse in on itself. The next morning, the same set, same table, same chairs looked different. CNN's Brianna Keilar led with a clipped smile and folded hands. Last night was certainly something. The panel laughed, awkwardly at first, but then the gloves came off. Bakari Sellers leaned forward, tapping a pen against the desk with rhythmic impatience, I'm going to be blunt, he said. DeSantis didn't ask a question. He issued a dog whistle. He tried to paint Jasmine as un-American, not because of her policy, but because she refuses to co-sign his sanitized version of America. The screen split to show Ron DeSantis speaking at a Veterans Day event 2 weeks prior. A clip rolled. This country has always been about freedom. If you don't like it, you can leave it. The feed cut back to the studio. This time, the silence was intentional. Alyssa Farah Griffin, usually careful with her phrasing, didn't hold back. I worked in the Trump White House, she said, voice tightening. I've watched that same love it or leave it tactic, used to silence women of color who dared to challenge power. It's not patriotism, it's paternalism, wrapped in a flag. Even the conservative-leaning guest, David Urban, shifted in his seat. I respect Governor DeSantis, he began cautiously, but he got outplayed. He didn't expect her to fight back with facts, poise, and fire. That moment, it wasn't just political, it was cultural. He miscalculated who he was sitting across from. A clip of Crockett's response, the now viral "I bled for this country in rooms that never wanted me in them." Line played on a loop in the chyron below. Social media turned it into a war cry. On TikTok, young veterans stitched videos explaining how Crockett had said what they couldn't. One user, a Latina Air Force vet, stood in front of her medals and said, voice cracking, "She's the only one who spoke for us. For the ones who got thanked for our service and then told to shut up when we asked for justice." Twitter X exploded. Memes, marching band remixes. A slow-zoomed video of DeSantis blinking too long when Crockett dropped her final sentence, but more telling than the noise was the recoil. That afternoon, DeSantis' Comes team released a 6-line statement. Governor DeSantis believes in the importance of respectful debate. He supports all Americans' right to love their country in their own way. No apology. No ownership, just retreat. End. The panel didn't let it go. Bakari raised an eyebrow, tapping the statement on the table. Translation: we got caught. The conversation turned sharper, more focused. Not on Crockett, but on the pattern of men in power using patriotism as a purity test. Patriotism, the panel agreed, had become a weapon, and Jasmine snapped it in half on national television. By nightfall, the segment had been clipped, subtitled, and dissected on a dozen major platforms. The headline on Vox read, "The DeSantis Collapse: How One Woman's Calm Wrecked a Presidential Persona Backstage at the Network." A producer looked at the metrics and shook his head. That wasn't a debate, he murmured. That was a shift. Because Crockett didn't just defend herself. She exposed the scaffolding holding men like DeSantis up. The idea that love of country had to look like them, had to sound like them, had to worship their story of America, not tell the whole one. And as the panel turned away from DeSantis' red-faced retort and toward the quiet, burning truth at the center of the moment, a new narrative emerged. This wasn't about civility. This was about clarity. The internet didn't whisper, it roared. By 10 a.m. the next day, the clip of Jasmine Crockett locking eyes with DeSantis and delivering her quiet, scorched earth response had been viewed 8.4 million times on X. The caption read simply, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes." Young people shared it with captions like, "My Congresswoman, this is what accountability looks like. Run this on a loop in schools." Veterans stitched it on TikTok. Civics teachers paused their morning lessons to play it in class. But what shocked the networks wasn't just how fast it spread. It was where Reddit threads in unexpected. Corners are conservative, our veterans or patriot debated the moment with rare seriousness. A pinned comment with 23,000 upvotes read, "I don't agree with her on policy, but what she said, that was real, that was earned." Crockett wasn't trending because she was loud, but because she was measured, a still frame from the broadcast. Her sitting still, eyes locked as DeSantis flinched, mid-sentence became the new face of political restraint. Graphic designers turned it into digital art. One mural appeared. Overnight in downtown Atlanta, her silhouette against an American flag. The words, "Patriotism means staying when it's hardest." Meanwhile, DeSantis' team scrambled. The governor's press conference that afternoon, meant to announce a new education bill, was hijacked by reporters. A New York Times journalist didn't wait long. "Governor, do you stand by your implication that Congresswoman Crockett is less patriotic because she challenges America's history?" DeSantis exhaled, visibly tight-lipped. "I said what I said," he replied. "We can't expect elected leaders to defend the country's values," another reporter cut in. "Whose values?" He blinked. "American values." And just like that, the internet had its next clip. Side by side, the two sound bites played across the news cycle. DeSantis fumbling over American values, and Crockett saying, "I fight for this country when it forgets to fight for people like me." The contrast was surgical. By that evening, Crockett's inbox overflowed with media requests. Editorials flooded in The Atlantic. A new standard for patriotism: the root, black, female, and fiercely American. Fox News. Jasmine Crockett weaponizes race to score a win, but even in outrage, momentum served her. An unexpected tweet came from General Barry McCaffrey, retired four-star Army general and former member of the National Security Council. "I don't agree with Rep. Crockett on many things. But make no mistake, that was the most patriotic moment I've seen on live TV in years. We need more of that clarity, not less." That tweet alone gained 11 million impressions. Even DeSantis' supporters began privately worrying about the optics. An internal GOP strategist leaked a memo to Politico that read, "The optics of attacking a black female veteran on patriotism are not sustainable, especially when the moment was handled with class and facts." The final blow came from the people. Hashtags exploded. Crockett Clapback, My Patriot, Stan Fite, community organizer in Minneapolis, launched a campaign to hold Crockett conversations in libraries and community centers, forums, where people could share their stories of loving a country that didn't always love them back. Within 72 hours, over 200 events were scheduled. Jasmine didn't ask for a movement, but sometimes history doesn't wait for permission, and as the headlines turned, as the panelists recalibrated, as DeSantis's media team struggled to spin gold out of ash, Jasmine Crockett remained quiet. No press tour, no grandstanding, just a pinned tweet. It was the same line from the debate. Simple, clear, unshaken. "I love this country enough to stay and tell it the truth. The corridors of Capitol Hill are rarely loud, but that morning, behind a row of closed committee doors, silence hummed with threat. Jasmine Crockett wasn't in the room, but her name was everywhere. She's getting too much heat," murmured a senior House Republican, his tie loosened as he leaned back in a leather chair. "Fox can only shield so much of this. We're losing the public narrative." Across the table, younger strategist tapped a tablet showing polling spikes among independent voters. "She's flipped the optics. What was supposed to be a patriotism trap has turned into a moral win. Even veterans groups are treading carefully." There was a pause, then a voice from the corner, calm, measured, cold. "We bring her down the old-fashioned way." Bureaucratically. Eyes turned. "Let her win the public sentiment. We'll bury her in subcommittees, strip her visibility, freeze the funding. That's how DC disciplines its rebels." Meanwhile, Jasmine sat across from her own chief of staff, exhaustion evident in her shoulders. A cup of cold coffee sat untouched on her desk. The lights dimmed in her office. "3 of your bills just got reassigned to committee members with no track record," her staffer said, eyes glued to the screen. Jasmine didn't react. "There. Also blocking your scheduled floor time next month." Still silence. Then she looked up, calm, clear. "They want a headline. I won't give them one." Her staffer hesitated. "You're not going to fight back?" Jasmine leaned back. "I already did, on camera. They can't unfilm that." She knew the rhythm of retaliation. It's not loud, it's slow, strategic, dull. They would isolate her legislatively, whisper her into irrelevance. Backroom doors would close, but behind those doors, some weren't whispering. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley called. "That was one hell of a moment," she said. "You're not alone in this. It may freeze you out, but they're waking something up out here." Ilhan Omar reposted Crockett's clip with the caption, "This is how we fight back with truth and spine." And in the Judiciary Committee, a subtle revolt began. A fellow Democrat, quiet, white Midwestern, refused to co-sponsor a new education bill unless Crockett's amendments were heard. "She earned that," he told the chairman. "She earned America's ear. You don't get to take that away just because it's inconvenient." But the retaliation wasn't just procedural, it was personal. Right-wing influencers dug into Crockett's record, misquoted speeches, resurfaced old tweets. A former staffer dismissed for misconduct suddenly appeared on Newsmax with vague claims of ethical concerns. Jasmine read the headlines in silence. Her father called from Texas. "You're all right, baby?" She smiled, despite it all. "You're just scared I'll keep telling the truth." He paused. "You were born for this. Just make sure you survive it." Most chilling moment came not on television, but in an elevator. Senator Marsha Blackburn stepped in beside Jasmine for a moment. Silence. Then Blackburn glanced sideways. "You made quite a scene." Jasmine didn't flinch. "You made quite a mistake." Blackburn smiled thinly. "You'll learn. This place punishes women who don't know how to behave." Jasmine's reply was immediate. "Good. Then they'll know I don't plan to behave." Backlash isn't always a bang sometimes. It's the quiet creak of power realigning itself behind closed doors. But in that quiet, Jasmine Crockett stood still and refused to bow. The House Oversight hearing room looked no different than it had days before. Same worn mahogany desks. Same American flag draped in stillness. Same overhead lights, too bright, too sterile. But something had shifted. The audience was packed. Reporters lined the back walls, cords tangled beneath chairs. Every major outlet was streaming live. Clips from Jasmine Crockett's explosive clapback had dominated headlines for a week straight, dissected on cable news, memed across TikTok, and praised by retired generals and high school debate teams alike. Now the committee reconvened. Officially, the docket was about a proposed funding review for military community programs. Unofficially, it was about her. Jasmine entered the room to a silence that crackled. Even those who had condemned her now watched with a wary reverence. She moved slowly, not for drama, but for gravity.
Ow.
She wasn't just a congresswoman today. She was a symbol. She sat, adjusted her mic. The chairwoman gavelled in. "The committee will now resume proceedings." A Republican member leaned forward, interrupting. "Before we begin, Madam Chair, I'd like to address the statements made by Congresswoman Crockett in our prior session." Jasmine didn't flinch. She expected this. The congressman cleared his throat. "We may disagree on policy, even sharply. But let me say this questioning. Someone's patriotism for political points is beneath the dignity of this House." That moment forced all of us to remember who we are. He nodded, almost reluctantly. "And though I still disagree with Congresswoman Crockett on many issues, I thank her for reminding the country what courage looks like." A ripple moved through the room. Cameras zoomed in. Jasmine lifted her gaze, and this time, she spoke slowly, without fire, but with the heavy calm of someone who had endured something deep and come out sharper. Patriotism isn't about flag pins or shouting the loudest in a hearing room. It's about protecting the vulnerable, upholding the Constitution, especially when it's inconvenient.
Ow.
Telling the truth, even when it costs you something. She let that breathe. I was called unpatriotic because I challenged a narrative. I asked questions that made people uncomfortable. But I've read that Constitution cover to cover. Nothing in it says black women must be silent to be respected. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman stood, slowly. Then another, and another. Mothers, veterans, college students, staffers, one by one. The public audience rose to their feet. It was not a protest, it was reverence. Back in Texas, Jasmine's father sat glued to the television. His eyes were glassy, the same way they'd been when he watched her sworn in. Her mother stood beside him, hand on his shoulder. "She's doing it, Charlie. She's really doing it." That night, the news cycle was dominated not by the anger but by the reckoning. MSNBC aired a primetime segment titled, "Silence No More: The Rise of Jasmine Crockett." CNN's Chiron Reed. Crockett's courage reframes the patriotism debate. Even The Atlantic published a think piece titled, "The Black Woman Who Redefined the American Hearing Room." But the true culmination didn't happen on television. It came weeks later, when that same funding Bill 1 that had been slated for quiet death passed with bipartisan support included within it. An amendment authored by Jasmine Crockett, directing mental health resources and housing support for veterans. Facing deportation threats, an overlooked issue she had championed for months. No one mentioned it by name during the final vote, but every journalist watching knew she won. Not just the bill, not just the moment, the narrative. One final moment. Months later, the Capitol Rotunda, quiet. Jasmine walked alone beneath the domed ceiling, tracing the footsteps of so many who came before her, some beloved, some despised, some forgotten. But she walked knowing she had carved a mark not on stone, but on the consciousness of a country in conflict with its own reflection. A security guard passed her. He paused. "You said what I've been thinking for 20 years?" She smiled, then, "Keep thinking it. They can't unhear us now." He nodded and walked on. History doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks in a calm voice. It's unwavering, across a microphone, and a nation finally listens. And on that day, in the courtroom of America's conscience, Jasmine Crockett did not ask for permission to belong. She claimed it.